Okay, I guess we can start. Good morning. Welcome everyone. Welcome to In Between Media Conference. I'm Tommaso Campagna, and it's my honor to be today your host, together with my colleague, Chloe Arkenbout.
Hi, welcome everyone. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces today. Both Tommaso and I work as researchers at the Institute of Network Cultures, which is a research group at the Digital Media and Creative Industries faculty at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, which was founded by Geert Lovink in 2004. At INC, we have a strong focus on the transdisciplinary nature of new media and its DIY and open source components. And we try to give equal attention to the artistic, political, technical aspects of the internet. So our research areas extend to design, activism, art, philosophy, political theory, and urban studies. And we think that the internet can only be understood at the conjuncture of these various fields. We also have some books with us. They're in the back. They're free, so take some if you like. And today we'll be diving into the hybrid tactical media and the age of crises.
So I'm going to give you a bit introduction of the day in the sense of more technical of how the program is structured. As you know, it's a two-day conference. Today is in SPAO. Tomorrow is in Framed, and it's going to end up with a night program in OT 301. As you can see, today is structured in three main parts. We're going to start with an introduction from Geert Lovink and a lecture from Joanna Moll, and following by two panels. The first one is going to be curated and moderated by Dunja Nešović, and it's going to be about tactics, trends, and aesthetics of the so-called TikTok limbo. After that, we're going to have lunch, 1 hour break, and after lunch, we're going to start with the second and also last panel that is called Practices of Streaming Resistance. And followed by a short break, and finally we're going to have the last round of lectures and presentation that is going to bring us to understand how to collect all the different practices and tactics that we will look into during the day into a bit more cohesive strategies. And finally, of course, drinks.
So for now, I would like to invite Geert Lovink to the stage to introduce the day.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, it's exciting to be back. The last full INC conference was in November 2019, and this was Money Lab number 7 outside of finance, and so it took us more than 3 years to come back and do what we were once almost very good at and were used to, namely to host these events, to bring people together, to have a conference, festival, exhibition, and so yeah, for us it's very, very exciting. We also have to say, especially in the cultural field, we had lots of setbacks because of the COVID period. There was a certain hesitation even last year to organize bigger events, and so yeah, we have not really benefit a lot from the COVID at all, right? So this is why it still feels for us early days. I also have to say there's an exciting part to it for us because in the summer of 2020 we had a change of the generation, and the third generation took over in INC. So yeah, so this is very exciting for me. First generation, of course, with Sabine, we started in 2004, and then the change in 2011, 12. With Patricia and Miriam, they're here as well. So for me, it's great that all the generations of INC are here. Now let's go to the topic, because what does it mean, go hybrid? Of course, this is a conference that is part of a 2-day applied science grant. Which is granted to the Hogeschool where we are based. It's a Polytech, applied science school. So this is kind of halfway into the 2-year research. We started very early, still in lockdown and COVID, in early 22. And we wrote the application and thought about it, of course, in the darkest of days in COVID, in early 21. So this is when it almost felt like also when we worked on it, not only with a new team, but we also felt like with almost illegal coming together, in the space we couldn't even enter the building. And so going hybrid for us also meant a kind of a promise. A promise after COVID, a promise also that we would leave behind these dreadful days of Teams and Zoom, right? And so this drive to go away from the lockdown, from the Zoom fatigue. Donatella is here, and I worked with her on the Zoom fatigue topic, right? So this was and still is our main drive. The idea of going hybrid can be very simple. Not only mixing the real and the virtual, but also thinking of, okay, we are here now in a space, and this is what we can celebrate, right? It's quite amazing that we are in one space together, right? But how do we envision the presence of the others? In this case, for instance, we are streaming live, right? But where are they? Are they with us? Are they with us in spirit or virtual? Can they say something, right? That's one aspect. The other aspect, so that's the aspect of live casting and thinking in hybrid terms of how do you bring together people that are in a space with others. And this is easier said than done, and the Teams and Zoom software absolutely do not support us in that way, right? So this needs to be said. Then we also think about, okay, when we do these kind of hybrid events, how do we archive them? How do we report about them? And we will report about this event and tomorrow also in this kind of new way. Because if the event is here for us here in real time, we also think like, okay, we have a lot of tools that we can kind of involve others in it, like video, audio. We can, but how do you do that? How do we, in a new way, think through what we discuss? How do we process it? And how can we process what we are doing and discussing here together? Again, involving the virtual others who may not be here and who may not be here at this very moment, right? Maybe they are with us next week or in 1 year, right? Okay, so this is the topic of living archives and of hybrid publications. And tomorrow we will dedicate a lot of time to these specific, let's say, groups. And because these are research groups, and so there are, basically three topics in. But we decided that the conference of today, we should focus much more, not so much on this research side, because we do that tomorrow in the workshops, and we also have a plenary session. But we should focus much more on the discussion we decided that after COVID, because we have moved on, right? Of course, 1 year ago, the war in Ukraine started. And this has brought us a lot of new urgencies and new tactics that we will also discuss here today and tomorrow. We're very pleased that some of the members of Ukraine TV, with their studio based in Krakow, Poland, will be here with us and present and discuss their work. Last year we were here in the midst of November, and that was a great moment, because this is another topic that we are working on, and this is the critical meme research. And all these things kind of, for us, are starting to come together, in the sense of that we ask the question of what is the status of the moving image or the image or designing the image, right, in this period. The memes are becoming more more alive. They are no longer just a two-dimensional picture with some comment underneath, right? The memes have moved into music, into video, and and this is an old topic in a way of INC. So our oldest research network, still alive, the Video Vortex, was dealing and is still dealing with this question, right? Of what is online video, what is the politics and aesthetics of online video. Maybe today we put them in more urgent, more activist maybe perspectives. And of course we have moved on from the era of YouTube in a way. And this is why we decided this morning to focus really on the case of TikTok, right? So you may ask, why TikTok? Who cares? Huh? It's only 1.5 billion people who use it. Why bother? Yeah, but so this is the answer, right? So. So the question really for us is, how do we make the new connections, right? And that's the tactical media questions, to make new temporal and local connections between all the possibilities, the media, the platforms, the cameras, or the graffiti for that matter, or any kind of hybrid combination is what can and will be discussed here today and tomorrow. And it is in that light that we decided to invite Joanna Moll, because she is really, for us, a person who is very, very much close to what we've been doing here at INC for so many years. And I would like to briefly introduce her. She's based in Barcelona, an artist and researcher. Her work critically exposes the way techno-capitalist narratives affect the alphabetization of machines, humans, and ecosystems. Her main research topic include internet materiality, surveillance, social profiling, and interfaces. She is the co-founder of the Critical Interface Politics Research Group at Hangar in Barcelona. And she has been a fellow at the BBVA Foundation and a fellow at the Weissenbaum Institute in Berlin, where she was based for a while, until recently. She is currently a visiting lecturer at the Escola Elisava in Barcelona, and artistic researcher in residence at the Critical Media Lab at the HGK in Basel, in Switzerland. Thank you so much, and Joanna, please take the floor.
All right. Okay, I think now we're set. Good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot for the very nice introduction, and I'm very happy to be here because I mean, I've been following you for years, right? And it's great to be here finally. And I was talking to Gerd before. It's one of the first lectures I give post-COVID, like in person. It feels good. I mean, first was in Transmediale a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, probably a month, right? I know some of you probably have been there. It felt like very relieving, so it's really nice. But anyway, I have a lot of things to explain. I mean, just cut me when I want to try to compress it as much as I can. I'm going to talk about exactly what Gerd said when he introduced my work about interfaces, materiality, and data extraction, internet, at large. So yeah, let's just start. So even though our internet ecosystem it's expansive, it's massive, it's probably the biggest infrastructure we've built as humans, right? It extends, it's a transnational infrastructure, but it's really invisible and it's just accessible through interfaces. There is no way we can negotiate with the system, right? I mean, we can interact with it, but there is like very little margin for negotiation. Yeah, and this is very much dictated by the interface. Interfaces allow you or dictate what you can do and what you cannot do. With the internet. Yeah, I mean, it's like this political arrangement that it's very much embedded in the interface. We could discuss this for hours, but I'm gonna leave it here. Then there is something about interfaces. I mean, this quote, I read it in Franco Berardi book, and I was sure it was his quote, but no, that was Bill Gates. It's something like, it's a bit annoying to quote him in a presentation, but what can we do? But I think that this quote is quite nice. I mean, it's quite self-explanatory. The power in the digital age is about making things easy. I think, there is probably some younger people, but people from our generation and older, if you remember like the interfaces that you were using, even like 10, 15 years back, like material, physical interfaces, also software, yeah, like graphical interfaces. Like the interactions were not as smooth as they are now. And the interactions, we have the way our interactions are designed with the internet as smoothing out as time passes, yeah. This basically means that we just produce more. I remember that years ago we had to connect to the internet. Now we have to disconnect from the internet, right? And what this means for these companies is that you just keep on producing more data, which at the end generates more power for them in terms of information, also in terms of economic power, yeah, among many other things. So I think it's easiness or ease of use is not just something that it's embedded in design. It's like an ideology, and we need to see it as that. That it's not natural. It's not natural that our interfaces get easier and easier to use. It's just like an ideology embedded in the way this business model is being conceived. Yeah. Then, I know most of you know this. This has many names: cognitive capitalism, surveillance capitalism, necro-capitalism. I mean, many names. I really like this name, but I think it's important to remember it's like the sort of the financial context, economic system that we are all inscribed with. So wealth is no longer produced exclusively by material goods, like stuff, microphones, computers, tables, chairs. Yeah? Wealth is also being produced or generated through intangible, like quantifying intangible actions, yeah, such as communication, such as human expression, yeah, such as just texting friend, such as making like an online purchase and making a lot of other things. Yeah, this has been possible through devices. Yeah, so devices. I mean, I'm going to say it very bluntly. It just basically transform everything that we do in electricity, in numbers. Yeah, so then everything can be quantified and then can be commodified. Yeah, things that we didn't thought that we could give a value to. Yeah, like chatting. Yeah, like doing anything that has to do with something that's not material. Yeah, but devices turn it into something material. So I'm going to talk a lot about the web with the business model of the internet, because it's something that I don't think like a lot of us acknowledge, and it's very hard to frame it. So ad tech, which is a name for advertising technology, is a primary money machine funding for the web. And essentially, like the business model, it's really, I mean, it's about serving advertising, but if we go a little bit beyond, it's really about trading user attention. Yeah, just getting as much precise attention from a user in order to be able to see an ad and react properly to it, properly as the way like these companies want, which was basically that you're gonna buy what they advertise. It really it works the same way as stock markets in Wall Street works. And this is, again, not something that is natural. It's a decision. It's a set of decisions. Like the Silicon Valley was basically a very geeky space, and the business model was completely different. Actually, it was not that efficient in terms of financializing, like their products. In the early 90s, mid 90s. Google, for example, the business model of Google was just to sell licenses of their searchers. So the main idea was that they would you have a website, you want to have a search engine, so you pay Google to have the search engine there, yeah, just for an instant. And then at the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, a lot of people from Wall Street came to Silicon Valley. So they applied the same kind of thought that they applied to Wall Street into Silicon Valley. And essentially, like ad tech, that's how it works. It's really stock market. It even has like a auction system. Yeah, a little bit an auction, which comes with a lot of speculation in the way that advertising is being traded. Like information, user information combined with advertising. It's really like, it's an auction. It's called real-time bidding. We won't have time to go into it, but if somebody is interested, I can explain this further just after when we chat or on the Q&A. So this business model, it's so massive that it's like it generates the biggest part of revenue stream for companies like Alphabet and Facebook, Alphabet, Google. Yeah, this is the data from 2016. I have data from 2022, but the graphics weren't so nice, so I didn't use them. But it just, it didn't decrease. Yeah, actually increased for most of them. Yeah. So basically, most of the services and products from Facebook and Google, or Alphabet, Meta, they're being funded by advertising money, by ad tech money. So ad tech, it's a short, as I said, from advertising technology, and it comprises like many different services and products like analytics, like content management systems, etc., etc. It's as I say, extensive and really, really complex ecosystem. And the main goal of this ecosystem is to understand user behavior. Target, understand user behavior. So user data is the primary source of this ecosystem. That's why data extraction practices are so pervasive, so incisive, yet so silent. Yeah. This is broadly like an ecosystem of companies, services, and products that comprise ad tech. This data from 2020, it's more than 8,000, well, they call them solutions. I wouldn't call them solutions, But as you can see, it's really, it's complex. Yeah, it's like a very complex entanglement of things, people, yeah, ways of seeing the world as well, so on. So, very easy way. This is a graphic that's from catalyzed. They published this fantastic report. It's called Networks of Control in 2017, where they gave like very, very good information of how data extraction practices worked beyond the interface. And I always use this graphic because I think it explains what's happening very well. So anytime we do something online, like a like we share something, like we scroll, we click, there is like, this time, did you realize when you are loading a website is loading, it's like 10 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds, there is some things are happening, like the page is like loading, but it's not like it's loading one time. So there is a lot of things happening in this 10 to 20 milliseconds, yeah? So there is all this information about what you just did in the interface goes into a big engine that basically translate like all user data among you have no idea how many, if it's thousands of companies, if it's hundreds, you know, that are just sharing your data, analyzing your data, and give you like a result. That's what you see on the screen, which in this time it's being decided which content is shown, which products are listed, options and choices are available, payment, shipping methods are offered, and so on. Yeah, so basically what's happening in this like sort of engine, it's targeting and analyzing user behavior. And this will determine what you're going to be displayed on the interface. Yeah? So this guy, I'm not sure if some of you know it. This guy, I can't pronounce the name, has a French name, Louis Montuil, in my very lack of precise French. So he's the guy that created the cookies, he and his team. And this happened in 1994. So what this proposed, what this represented for the internet, is that the internet went from being a place where you could just do anything under relative anonymity to being a place where everything could be potentially recorded. Yeah, just like I always put this metaphor of, you know, like imagine a street without videos or like surveillance cameras, or imagine a street with surveillance cameras. Yes, so it's exactly the same. Even though this was not the goal of creating cookies, Louis and his team wrote, wasn't a paper, but some sort of an article or white paper, which stated that this was a potential danger. You know, like cookies could potentially represent like a massive, or create a massive future surveillance state, which, voila, here we are, right? 30 years later, right? 29 years later. Yeah, 94, yeah, right, yeah. So, online tracking. Online tracking basically refers to all these technologies that allow for extracting data and collecting data of a user. I always put anonymously because even though you can understand sometimes which companies are extracting data, to have access to this information, it's complicated and it's not easy at all. But anyway, like online tracking is just basically this process of collecting any activity done by user in an interface or several interfaces. And this information is obtained using different technologies and methods such as cookies and fingerprinting. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go to technical specifics. Fingerprinting also use cookies, but so you have an idea. Like an idea of fingerprinting. This is this guy that has these videos that is comparing which browser fingerprints, which browser doesn't. I think Brave browser doesn't, right? I'm looking there because he showed me the video. So anyway, here you have an idea. Fingerprinting basically is just taking, identifying features of a browser, like features that uniquely identify a user. So you can see some of them here. You know which kind of fonts you have installed in your browser, which kind of plugins you have installed also in the browser, which browser are you using, where you're coming from, the volume of the audio, the size of the canvas, and many, many different other variables that you can use. And it's incredible how each one of our browsers here would be different. Yeah, even just a tiny thing, you know, like the audio volume, or just like a variation in 2 or 3 pixels in the size screen. Yeah? So it's actually very easy to identify users. There is a video, hope it plays, which shows also, this is a Hotjar. It's a company that has places these cookies in websites, which allow the owner of the websites to understand how their users move the mouse. Yeah, for example, Ryanair is using this, and thousands and thousands of other companies are doing it. So these cookies allow to create heat maps. Also, which a heat map in a website, it shows which areas a user is interacting more with. Therefore, advertising or any content is going to be placed there. Yeah. So here, I think this video is just priceless. So this is the video that announced like their services.
Today, most sites are built and improved based on hunches and guesses. But maybe we just don't need to guess anymore. Take Hotjar. Instead of guessing what motivates your users' behavior, you can now see which bits of your site they love, where they click, tap, move, how far they scroll, and what they totally ignore. And by playing videos of your visitors, it's as if you're watching the screen over their shoulder. So you can see what turns them off your site and causes abandonment. But it doesn't end there. You can also ask questions directly to your visitors. Ultimately, this means you can optimize your website's user experience, prioritizing content that needs attention for quick and effective results. Overall, Hotjar's range of features gives you access to solid proof about your users' behavior. So wave goodbye to old-fashioned guesswork. Hotjar, all-in-one analytics and feedback.
Well, I mean, a lot of times I think about these engineers that are programming this stuff and the people that is doing like this video, you know, and the scripts that basically define what this video is going to say. I feel like there is like this massive association, right? They don't see themselves also as users, you know, and citizens of this world where this technology, you know, is just going to come and hound them back. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Anyway, if there is any engineer here that work in one of these companies, I'd love to talk to him or her. So anyway, you've seen it, right? Like, why to do like old guesswork when you can just spy directly, you know, over their shoulder? Anyway, so this is like a very simple scheme of how we generate data. Yeah, so browser and websites where how data is being actually extracted and analyzed. So fingerprinting, cookies, usage patterns, as we've just seen. Web searches, yeah, so they've search queries are being analyzed. Smartphones, app usage, call, SMS, logs, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and GPS. Mouse usage patterns. There is these studies that companies have been able to identify like personality and also emotional states of users through the typing patterns and the mouse movements. Yeah, keyboard, typing rhythm patterns, wearables, habits, all sort of habits. I don't know if I don't see any smart watch here, but no, it's just like anything, like bit rates, how much do you walk, when do you wake up? Yes, there's one. Okay. So Internet of Things. I'm not sure, I haven't heard the name of IoT very recently. Maybe it has another name already. But again, habits, you know, like think about a smart fridge. You know, which type of food do you put in? How much do you buy? You can determine how many people live in the house. How healthy do you eat? How regular your meal habits are, etc., etc. Public institutions, public records. Are you married, divorced? Did you move? Do you own a house? Did you go to the university? Do you register to vote? And anything that you can imagine. Yeah, so there's actually a lot of data about ourselves. Yeah, this friend this week told me, because I was explaining her that, and he said, okay, but what is actually not datafied? I mean, what is not? Which part of me is not data? Yeah. And I think it's an interesting question. I could not find an answer, really. What is not possibly being datafied, right? So anyway, there is the data brokers, also like a massive, biggest player in this ecosystem. So there's like companies. It's like it works like like brokers in Wall Street, but in this case they trade in data instead of money, which is also money, right? But still. So they collect public, private information about the user, and this information may include like credit card numbers, Google searches, shopping history, browsing habits, and so on. These companies, I explain it very, very simple, use this data to create individual profiles to which they attach certain values and personalities of any user and sell them or share them with other companies, yeah? Or they just combine information with several other companies. Those are one of the biggest. This is from 2017. Some of these might have changed, but for sure, like Axiom, it's the biggest data broker in the world. Is an American company. Also Epsilon and Experience are very, very big, and Oracle, which I didn't put here for a weird reason. So Axiom in 2019, it claimed to have information on 700 million users, and it was like this information was divided in 1,270 groups or segments. Yeah, segment is basically a cluster of interest or particularities of several users that can fall into the same cluster. So they had like the most valuable data package that they had, like the cluster, it was called Shooting Star. This has changed now, but just to give you an idea how these companies work. And it included people from 36 to 45 years that woke up early. They like to run. They didn't have children, but they were married. They traveled like Seinfeld. Yeah. So there is all this information that is being collected, analyzed, and clustered. And we are in some of those profiles. Yeah, then there was like the waste, like something that literal non-economic value, you know, like in general. Also, this infographic is from Crack Labs. I'm not sure you can read it properly, but so you make an idea that some of the points of data that these companies can get from you. Axiom provides up to 3,000 attributes and scores of 700 million people in the US, Europe, and other regions, obviously. And Oracle, which Oracle focus very much in doing credit score. It means like to determine whether a user is going to be viable to pay back a credit, to get a health insurance policy, etc., etc. So Oracle claims to sort people into thousands of categories and provides more than 30,000 attributes on 2 billion consumer profiles. One of the workshops that I really want to do soon, I hope, is to just sit down and try to write down just 3,000 attributes. I think 30,000 is impossible about ourselves and what we come up with. You know, to try to extract all the information we can. Yeah, I tried this with my students. It's been very, very interesting about ourselves. You don't get very far. You know, I think we managed to get like 200, 250. Yeah, and it's super interesting. Anyway, also this is very nice. Like we cannot read it, but it's in the page of Panopticon Foundation. So there is a massive difference between what you share, what your behavior tells to these companies, and what the machine thinks about you. Yeah, so there is this 3-layer process when it comes to data. I really recommend, because I cannot blow it up here, but if you check like Panopticon Foundation and this, or if not, we can read it quickly after. Yeah, but it's about what you share. You might share your credit card, but your behavior tells them. They will analyze what did you buy with the credit card, how regularly you buy with the credit card, and what the machine thinks about you. It's how rich you are, how poor you are, how likely you are to buy more in the next month. Yeah, sort of what you know, like everybody thinks about you, and they analyze about you. This is one of these segments group of Axiom that I was telling you before. As you can see, there is like the name are quite priceless, like hard chargers, city mixers, established elite, country single, career building, full steaming. Yeah, so those are profiles from people that are spending more than 1,000, or they spent more than 1,000 euros online in the last 12 months, I think. And they have like their marital status, for example, Shooting Star, so hard chargers. They are single, they don't have kids, they're between 30 and 45 years old, they live in suburbs and towns. But this is real people. I mean, these are real profiles with identifiers. No, it's not that it's just like a big, like metaphoric group of things. No, it's like people. For example, when you go to Axiom, when you look for a data package, that's what you find. So let's say that I own a flower shop, and you know, like Mother's Day is approaching. I think it's really approaching, right? It passed, I'm not sure. So anyway, you want to increase your revenues, and you want to increase like number of users that will come to your website or to your shop. They would just buy flowers. So you can go to Axiom and get like this information. So they will just try to seduce you with Mother's Day spending. There is the breakdown: 4.2 billion in jewelry, 4.1 billion in special outings and dinners, and 2.4 on flowers. So, you know, like that's really like the people I want to convince to come to my shop. And then you have like all these groups like the generous gentleman, which tells you that's this guy, the disposable income, and he's not afraid to spend it on his wife or mom. The department store that, we tell you at which department store this guy most likely shops. The getaway guy and the car connoisseur, yeah? So there is all this information, yeah? It's all these 3 layers, you know, what you shared and what the machine knows about you after all, yeah? And that's what's being reflected here. Also, if it's tax season, they also have a data package for tax season. You have like the fast facts here, and those codes are codes for clusters. Yeah. So these clusters, like people are likely to file taxes in February, file taxes in March, last-minute filers, online filers, use professional filing service. Yeah, so there is all this information that they can gather just by this to understand when do you present your tax returns. But if you go to these companies and you ask them for your information, you get this if you are lucky. Yeah, I mean, it's like very obfuscated. You know, it's this very huge asymmetry of extracting and getting back. Yeah, so these companies extract data like no tomorrow for any single user, any single interaction in the internet as we speak, but then the return is very minimal. You cannot go to these companies and ask for your data. Well, you can, but good luck with it. Yeah, and even if they give you data, they will give it to you completely unreadable. Yeah, because that's their business model. They don't want to give data to you so everybody could use it. No way. Just to understand like the magnitude. So Facebook has profiles, and probably now it's more, almost 2 billion. Google 2 billion. Axiom has data in 700 million, but has 1 billion cookies and mobile devices, etc., etc. I mean, the numbers are quite big. I mean, these companies have data in massive amount of citizens. Yeah. Also to understand how much do we visit all these websites or platforms and services that at the end, you know, this is where the data extraction process is starting. So Google has, on average, probably it's a bit more now, but 92.5 billion visits per month. Yeah. Facebook 25.5, YouTube 34.6, etc., etc. So imagine like all these visits and all these interactions, how these translate to data. Yeah, for these companies. Also the energy use, because it's not just about extracting data. Those processes are all automatized, so they are made algorithmically. So there was this study published in 2016 that the carbon footprint of online advertising was evaluated at 60 million metric tons, which constitutes 10% of the total internet infrastructure emissions. These 60 million metric tons, I checked it out, it equals to 60 million flights to London, between London and New York, for example. I'm very skeptical of these numbers because I did this project, I'm going to talk about it now, last year, which analyzed the carbon footprint of cookies. And there is not a global agreement or like standards on how to calculate the energy consumption or carbon emissions from the internet. I mean, it's really polarized. I was very surprised. Like numbers can vary from 19 times more, 90 times less. It's quite insane. So it's a reference, take it lightly. So this project I told you, it's called Carbolytics. I published it exactly a year ago and measured the carbon impact of tracking cookies found in the top 1 million websites. And we found, and we were very conservative. I did this in collaboration with the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. It's the third largest supercomputing center in Europe. And we found 21 million cookies in the top 1 million websites. This equal to 197 trillion cookies created per month. And equal to this 1,100,000 monthly metric tons of CO2 emissions, which is not that much if you compare it to other industries, but we're talking about cookies. Cookies are nothing. I see cookies as parasites. So what's happening? This is the project, I'm going to show it to you now. So what's happening every time we go to a website? Yeah. So there is all these cookies that are being created, downloaded. So when we go to a website, it's not that we go to a website. The website's actually coming to us. And it's being downloaded in our computer. Yeah. And then there is all these cookies that are also being installed in our computer. And those cookies are basically sucking data. But it's not that they're just sucking data. They also parasite the energy from our computers to suck data. And this, for me, this was like the main motivation to do this project, because we don't tend to see things like that. That even in the privacy advocacy narrative, this is not included, you know, because I think that beyond like privacy rights, there's also this collective rights of energy consumption, of environmental impact that should be embedded when we advocate for digital rights in terms of privacy. Yeah, because these are like climate change collective rights, and this is something that is really out of the question. I think it's a mistake, and it should really be there. So, just to give you like some reference, we found that Google Analytics cookie was like the most pervasive in all these websites, followed by the Trade Desk, which is also like a giant in programmatic advertising or ad tech. Third one was also like a Google cookie, and fourth was from Amazon cloud services. And in terms of environmental impact, we found something very weird. There is this company, which is the first cookie called Gazale Media. It's a very small company in Toronto, based in Toronto. And I think they had some sort of failure in their system, because we found their website, their cookie, like being replicated up to 26,000 times in some websites. There's some kind of bug there. Yeah, that's why when we did this study, probably this was the reason why it was so polluting. But again, the second is the Trade Desk. The third is optional on consent, which is the cookie that allows you to block all the tracking cookies. Yeah, so it's also like another level of stress on the system. Yeah, in terms of energy. Okay, you have to opt out, but we require energy for you to opt out. Yeah, and I think that's why it's super important that energy expenditure, or like carbon emissions, are included in the privacy narrative, because then those things happen otherwise. There was something that caught us very much our attention. I didn't expect it, but we could not match a cookie with its organization. Almost half of them. So it was more than 4 million cookies that we could not identify. We didn't know where they belong. It was not half of them, it was 10%, sorry. But this was also surprising, because you see like there is all these small entities, basically that they have companies behind, and they just subtract data, and you should be entitled to know who they are and who they belong, but it's impossible to identify them. Yeah? Organization that had more cookies was Google, obviously, Pogmatic, Verizon Media, Gazale Media, etc., etc. And in terms of carbon emission of the cookies also, because we couldn't identify a lot of the cookies, most of the carbon emissions we couldn't just attach it to anybody, but the Trade Desk, well, Gazale Media, because of this bug, etc., etc. All these results explained in a white paper that we published together with the project, and I'm going to show you the project now, and that's going to be it. I'm not sure I'm connected to the internet, though. Hope so. Oops. Okay, so that's the project. So here we try to emulate. It's impossible because probably there's much more cookies activated in a millisecond that we could possibly expose here. But yeah, basically we try to take like a reference of all the cookies in terms of percentage and usage, and we just visualize them here. And you can click in any, like each icon, it's a different cookie. Then here you have specific information about any cookie, and where there is a link, for example, there's a number of websites that contain this cookie. Here you can access like all the websites within the top 1 million websites that contain this cookie, and so on. So it's really like a repository of like very pervasive like tracking practices. But still, I mean, we published it last year, and those things change so much and so fast that probably like this is outdated. You can get like a sense of what's happening, but for precise data, it's really important to contextualize it in February 2022. So yeah, I think it's 11. I think, yeah, I can leave it at that. Thank you.
We have time for some questions in the audience, if there are any. no questions. I think my colleague Tommaso has a question.
I have a lot, actually, but if I wanted to give space if there is others. But yeah, maybe it's a comment, question. First of all, thank you so much. I think the comment is kind of connected also to the theme of this conference and the idea of tactics. I think what you did here, it's very important, is to show something that is hidden, right, as you were saying at the beginning, and that's the main issue of the infrastructure. At the same time, we know, as the theme of this conference, that many artists, activists are creating tactics, are creating tools to do this. I'm thinking about you, I'm thinking about, many other. And I think this is very important, and we are in a stage in which, research combined with art, it's showing this and it's helping. But at the same time, as you were saying, some of these tactics are also used by the companies themselves. When you were showing the obfuscation that they send, when you ask for the cookies, the data, they obfuscate that, right? And that immediately remembered me the Nissenbaum tactics of obfuscation, and that was on the other side. So I guess it's a question, slight a comment, but how should we move on from this into bringing together these tactics? I know it's a big question. I'm not. But it's more like I guess a reflection on these practices that I think we give a lot of value to, but then at the same time we should also think how to collectivize those practices as well.
I mean, it's a great question. It's the question, right? I've been thinking about this a lot, and actually, I don't have an answer. I think for me, it's experimenting with new methodologies to try to bring this out. I'm doing a new project. I just started with the first test this last week, which I want to do it's not sort of a theater piece, more like an experimental performance of how art tech works. Yeah, but to embody this. And with it, we're doing this method. It's a bit freaky, but we're using systemic therapy. So I brought a therapist on board, and we're analyzing how cookies work in relationship to COs, in relationship to extraction of materials, to energy usage, how users might feel. So we are enacting this. I think it's very powerful because my idea is to bring CEOs and engineers and people that basically they're the ones that are creating all these psychopathic systems. And when you embody these things or what's happening, it's still very ethereal because I don't really know how to explain it. But when we embody the cookie with our body, or we embody and the user, and we're all together CEO, a lot of things happen. But we felt like I was the CEO. But you felt very powerful, but then somebody was embedding a cookie or a user, exploit a user, they were super sad and depressed. It was really interesting how, I think raise awareness of what this is actually doing to us. Because I feel this, I'm not saying that this is bad at all. I mean, this gives you a sense and this is a tool. But I feel we lack this connection to the body and what this means for us. Really, but not just for us, the ones that we are, in front of the interface, also for the ones that are beyond the interface. Yeah, and I think that for me, a lot of times when we do criticize these systems, we don't include this part, but in a way that it's not just the anti, because they are, and for me, they are the enemy in many ways, but part of the system that we should sort of, include them somehow differently. I don't know. Anyway, I don't have an answer. That's what I'm trying out now. And we'll see what will happen.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the idea of embodiment is definitely a strategy in that sense.
We'll see what will happen. But it's interesting. At least it's interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Other question? Yes.
Yeah, I want CEOs to cry, essentially.
It's not really a question, more of a remark, I think. So there's something about your presentation, and also I'm curious about, so there's something about these data brokers, but also the data collectors and these data profilers, that they're also selling a myth, right? That this is working. So I'm wondering to what extent you're researching this too, like how this is like whether this is working, and also whether this mythomization, that in a way this presentation is also part of, how this plays a role within that process, within that ecosystem.
So it's a good complex question, but it doesn't. I mean, it works in a way, but it doesn't work for the purpose that they claim that it works. You know, most of us receive advertising that is totally useless to us. You know, it's not like super relevant, but it doesn't matter. You know, I mean, their business model works regardless. And the thing is, like, in a very near future, if it's not happening now, you will need to fight against the profile that these companies will have had created of you when you go and ask for an insurance policy, you know, or maybe just even access to basic resources in the future. Yeah, there was this story of the head of what's it called, like forensic architecture, Eyal Weizman, that he went to. He used to travel to the US very often, and suddenly his entrance was denied at the border. Just because. And he went there, I think, like 2 months earlier or something, and they couldn't explain him why, but I think that he could not go in. So in a sense, he had to, you know, like subscribe to a set of decisions of profile that was created about him. Nobody could explain him really why, or they didn't want to explain him, but there was nothing. Yeah. So this is gonna happen increasingly. So that's the danger, that it doesn't work, because in some aspects it could have been better if it worked. Yeah. So that's in one side. Like, there's also this fear of, I mean, the advertising, the ad tech business model or ecosystem, whatever industry, is so inflated. Like, the praise and value is just like pure speculation, and there is a huge bubble there. And if this bubble explodes, it's gonna have like dramatic consequences. You know, because it's like it's funding really the internet. You know, a lot of, you know, we see like the stream, like revenue stream for Facebook and Google, all these services and all the people that work for these services and all the people that depend on these services, they're just gonna gone. That's it. Yeah, and that's gonna have like a domino effect. So it's not gonna be a small crisis. And how my presentation helps revisit this myth? I don't know, I thought about it. Need to think about it. Yeah, I hope by answering this, like, it's not so it's not such a myth anymore. Yeah, I don't know. I never claimed that it worked. It's just something that is there. It's not beautiful, even though, you know, I try to explain it in a playful or nice, like, so people can understand it. I don't know. What do you think? You know, I don't know. It's a good question, though. I'm gonna think about it. Thank you.
So maybe we have space for one more question, if there's any. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. At one point you asked what parts of our lives, experiences are not datafied, which is a good question. So what parts of human life are not datafied? I'm wondering, in this process, how does human life change? How does human experience change?
In what sense?
Also, I mean, I'll give maybe one example. So with ChatGPT, in their interaction with algorithms, people are increasingly interpolated as prompters of the algorithm.
Yeah.
So data extracts from people experience, but it also, in that process,
it
changes
rebuilds
human experience.
Yeah, yeah.
What it means to be human changes in the process. I'm wondering, I don't know, maybe this is a big question, but I'm wondering how you...
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the project I explained before. It is like systemic therapy applied to, you know, like the ad tech. It's also a way to understand how all this datafied, you know, like all this data about our bodies, ourselves, whatever, is actually getting back to us, right? And how it actually constructing us. It's affecting, because it's not, I don't think it's like... I think it's very direct when you interact with an interface, because also your body, your attention is being, you know, like predisposed or prescribed. I mean, you know, the way you can move your hands, the way you can position your body. But in a larger level, or even a metaphysical level, because there is a metaphysical effect of all this, it's very hard to see it. That's why I thought that therapy constellations can help to at least have a hint of that, yeah, of what's happening. Further than that, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer.
Thank you so much, Joanna.
Welcome.
Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. We can move to the first panel of the day, and I would like to invite Dunia Neshovic, that she curated, and she's going to moderate this panel. The theme is, well, as we were saying before, aesthetic trends and tactics of the TikTok limbo. But I'm going to give the stage to her. She's a new media researcher based in Amsterdam, but also a colleague and a good friend. Dunia?
Thank you, Tommaso. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on what will be a dynamic inquiry into one of the youngest, most popular, and probably the most controversial social media platforms of the present moment, which is TikTok. TikTok is often dismissed as frivolous, mind-numbing, or even as a tool of Chinese state surveillance. But this platform has nevertheless arguably instituted significant paradigm shifts in social networking, whether it concerns the expression it affords, its aggressive algorithmic mediation, or its distinctive transparent interface that naturalizes and conceals the intricate platform operations that govern our sense of the possible. During this panel, we will examine some of the novel, visual, cultural, social, and political forms brought about with this platform, and dive into the tensions between TikTok and its users that posit the platform native trends, aesthetics, and the notorious action of scrolling, to name a few, as sites of contestation and negotiation. Without further ado, I'd like to present the first speaker. Tina Kendall, who's an associate professor of film and media at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, United Kingdom. She has published widely on extreme cinema and negative affect, and her work on boredom and digital media has appeared in a range of publications, including New Formations, Nexus, and Film Quarterly. She is currently completing a book project, Entertained or Else, Boredom and Network Media, which will be published by Bloomsbury Academic in 2024. The title of Tina's presentation is Bored in the Hybrid House, TikTok as a ludotopia in a time of crisis. So please welcome Tina Kendall.
I'll use this, thank you. Hi everyone, thank you so much. And thanks to Chloe and Lawrence and the other organizers and Dunia. I'm really excited to be here talking to you. Like others who have said the same thing, I think this is my first public talk since the pandemic, and it's just so good to be back in person. So, as Dunia suggested, I'm working on a book now, and the conference themes speak really nicely to some of the questions that I'm currently trying to grapple with as we sort of move from the period of the pandemic. So, yeah, this is really useful for me thinking about some of the legacies of the pandemic as we move into this new era of permanent crisis, really. So, as Dunia said, there we go. So I'm currently finishing a book, Entertained or Else, that looks at boredom and network media. And as part of this, I had been sort of researching this topic before the pandemic. And as you might imagine, the pandemic threw up some very interesting material for those of us looking at boredom and social media. So I had been looking at platforms like YouTube and Vine and others, and I very quickly discovered that I absolutely had to very quickly get familiarized with TikTok. So one of the issues that interested me during the COVID crisis was how TikTok very swiftly managed to position itself as an ideal tool for addressing the realities of home confinement and what I've called in the shorter Film Quarterly piece that I've published on this topic, the pandemic's bored body problem. So the problem of what to do when your home feels like a prison cell, or a zoo enclosure, or when your skin is fused to the couch through epic bouts of semi-naked binge watching, or just when you're trying to cope with the new realities and the strange new temporalities of hybrid living that the pandemic has thrown up. So, as you may have guessed from my paper's title, my focus in the chapter in here today, just briefly, is going to be on the Bored in the House TikToks and the associated official Bored Vibes TikTok challenge that was based on the original Bored in the House track. That was, went viral during the first lockdowns in March, April 2020. Do you guys remember that Bored in the House track? Now it's in your head, sorry. Okay, anyway. So I just want to say a few words about how, what kind of hybrid sort of user tactics are at play in the Bored in the House and Bored Vibes TikToks. And I'll say more about how I'm using that term tactics later on. But I want to think about that, and then I also want to think about how these user tactics were then appropriated back into platform strategies, which sought to further reinforce TikTok as a machine for converting the pressures of home confinement into the joys of mimetic participation and ambient play. So in the context of lockdown, I think we all can think of examples of this. The home suddenly became more important than it ever was before. We looked at it in new ways. I, for one, decided I desperately needed to curate a more interesting background for my Zoom calls than the gray wall that had been there before. And of course, in public discourse, the home took on a series of new resonances. It was at once a safe haven where one could remain safe and where one could actually practice one's civic duty by protecting others. But it was also a restrictive enclosure where one felt, frequently entrapped and observed. So what I want to think about here is how these Bored in the House TikToks can be understood as a tactical means of modulating the oppressive, boring, cramped conditions of lockdown and reinventing the home as a ludotopia. And I'm borrowing this term ludotopia from Paul B. Preciado's book, Pornotopia, which considers the new ideal of domestic space that emerges in America during the Cold War, so 1950s, 1960s period, as it's intertwined with changing ideas about gender and sexuality during that period. And in Pornotopia, Preciado points to the Playboy Mansion, the Playboy Penthouse, and the Barbie Dream House as what he calls total inhabitable ludotopias. Spaces that were, he writes, fully networked, multimedia, totally open to public view, containing endless possibilities for work and play. And of course, it's important for me to add that Preciado frames this process as explicitly biopolitical, a fashioning of subjects best suited for the realities of the post-Fordist work situation. So like the Playboy Penthouse or the Barbie Dream House, what I'm calling, I guess, the TikTok-enabled home can also be understood as a meta-apparatus for fun and games. TikTok performs an important kind of work on mass experiences of household boredom by putting on display the myriad possibilities for fun and games that are available within this TikTok-mediated pandemic home. So, on the user side, I'm just going to think about some of the tactics that were enlisted to deal with this novel situation of home confinement and help people learn to just get by. So just to briefly contextualize the larger project, I coded so I looked at all of the TikToks that at the point at which I collected the data then existed that used the title track by Curtis Roach, who you see there on the left-hand side, and that either used Bored in the House or Bored Vibes hashtags. And I coded them into 5 different activity categories. And I'm just going to talk about 2 of those activity categories today, the performative and the stunt TikToks. Both of those categories attempt to manage the experience of home confinement by embracing the pleasures of full-bodied participation that are encouraged by TikTok's mimetic structures. These 5 categories are sort of on a scale of like most sort of physically sort of effortful to the least, and so I can talk about some of the others, but So the first category, performative TikToks, show people performing the title track for the most part, either through lip syncing or dance numbers that are choreographed to the beat. So very standard TikTok behavior here. These offer an obvious means of breaking up the tedium of lockdown life by encouraging users to respond to the song in their own ways through spectacular displays of physical movement from the confines of the home. So they perform an important psychological function by potentializing the scroll as full-bodied and participatory action, even if this potential remains virtual. So I think actually it performs this function on some level, whether you participate in the challenge or not. And I'll come back to that idea in a little bit. In her reading of short-form screen dance videos produced in the context of the pandemic, Pamela Krahenbuhl discusses how the constrained choreography and forced vertical orientation of TikToks produced during the pandemic constitutes what she calls a performance of entrapment, mirroring our shared experience of being stuck at home. But if aspects of content and form, as she says, work to articulate this sense of entrapment on some level, the sort of tone and stance of these TikToks is anything but. They tend to be very playful, energetic, and even joyful. And part of that, comes from the song, the rhythm that the song kind of enacts. Their logic is participatory, connective, and aimed at producing feelings of co-presence and social solidarity even within the context of lockdown. This is in keeping with the use of mobile apps as entry points onto what Larissa Hjorth and Ingrid Richardson call ambient play, a concept that foregrounds the potential of digital media to, in their words, move between and across co-located and network spaces, blurring divisions between public and private, and rethinking how we experience intimacy and co-presence. So in these examples, the Bored Vibes Challenge provides an impetus for users to get up and move around the home, but also produces a really powerful feeling of moving beyond it and creating social, solidarity and links with other TikTok users who are similarly bored in their homes. And obviously, during the pandemic, that was massively important. And this is a much funner category of TikTok, the stunt TikToks. So these feature all sorts of physical pranks, tricks performed for the most part within the space of the home, although we do have some taking place in gardens. While performative TikToks typically emphasize the networked body and its capacity for expressive performance against a backdrop that's not really, meant to be foregrounded, stunt videos focus on the space of the home itself as the object of ambient play. What's noteworthy about these examples is how they activate ambient play as a means of working on the sensory and affective texture or atmosphere of the home. And in the context of lockdown, TikTok provided users with therefore with a much needed set of tools for managing the boredom and bodily agitation of being stuck at home. So, for example, during the lockdown, this was my favorite. This was like a little micro trend where, did anyone see any of these? People would soap up the surfaces of their kitchens or like hallways. This one is actually a balcony, and create these kind of like slip and slide, extreme slip and slide courses in their homes. So you get things like that. You get people driving dirt bikes around through their home, like in the door, out the door, around the home, up the stairs, playing various sports, etc. And this one, I'm going to talk about this second one, which obviously combines the Bored in the House challenge with the Level Up challenge. The Level Up challenge, of course, predated the lockdown, but in the context of lockdown, I think it performs a different symbolic function. And actually, a lot of the Bored in the House videos do riff on the Level Up challenge as well. So a different symbolic function due to the new resonances that walls or barricades accrue in this context as potential metonyms for feelings of confinement. This one cuts from this shot that we're seeing here to the other side, where the stunt performer very elegantly kind of does a little roll and then sort of lands happily on the other side with this expression of joy. And I think it's particularly, it provides a particularly concentrated pleasure that comes from the way that it activates a fantasy of escape from the cramped space-time of lockdown. So where many of the memes that I evoked at the start of my talk poke fun at home confinement as an experience of incarceration, these stunt TikToks reimagine the home as playground rather than prison. So I read these TikToks as tactical because of the inventive ways that they produce the home as a joyful shared zone for creative invention. So, my use of the word tactical should echo the Desartodian idea of practices of everyday life, rather than being tactical on the level of platform architecture, which these they don't tend to be. So mediated through TikTok, the ordinary home affords fun on the condition that we learn to look past habitual ways of using it to discover creative affordances that have previously been overlooked. And I think TikTok helps users to some extent do this in the lockdown. This tactical process of creative invention echoes Ian Bogost's understanding. I disagree with him in a lot of ways, but anyway, on this point, I agree with him. Understanding of play and the relationship with both boredom and limits, he writes, quote, "Fun comes from the attention and care you bring to something that imposes arbitrary, often boring, and even cruel limitations on what you or anyone can do with them." So during the pandemic, users turned to TikTok as a set of tools to help produce powerful feelings of co-presence, to enliven the textures, rhythms, and atmospheres of the home, and really just to cope psychologically with, a very traumatic experience. And I think these board vibes TikToks produce a collective image of the home as a ludotopia, a potentially endless party zone that yields infinitely to the desires of its inhabitants. And it's also this idea that then gets very quickly actually reappropriated by TikTok as a means of promoting the app through various campaigns. So there were at least two that did this in the UK. This one was actually from their first ever UK television advert, which came out a little bit after in the second lockdown, I think, or maybe a little bit after the first. But the Brighter Inside campaign, and also they had another one called House of TikTok that really kind of played on this idea of creative reinvention from within the space of the home. In the US, they launched a Happy at Home campaign, and both the House of TikTok and Happy at Home campaigns actually incorporated live stream elements. So actually the sort of entire model of TikTok suddenly changed and pivoted towards a kind of broadcast model that so they would program live stream content with celebrities. So all of these are promoting the platform as a ludotopia, a space where people could gather and make the most of lockdown life, while also contributing to the global stay-at-home effort. But while these campaigns position TikTok as a technology for addressing the bored body problem, what they obscure is how the platform also relies on the bored body as a basic requirement of its business model. And this is, I guess, one of the main paradoxes of mobile media in general. As Hjorth and Richardson note, while mobile apps allow us to remain entertained while unattached and on the move, they also tether us to a sense of being at home, and in some ways tether us to our homes. These TikTok campaigns train us to the investment that so-called on-the-go media platforms have long had in domesticity and in a condition of being bored in the house. While it's tempting to look back on the pandemic period and think about this as a state of exception and interruption of lived reality, I've come to think about this condition of being bored in the house as chronic to digital network culture. And in this context, it's important to emphasize how platforms like TikTok embody both the potential for tactical reinvention of the everyday, at the same time as they reinforce the subject's relationship with digital capitalism and its forms of submission, surveillance, and control. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Tina. So I would like to introduce the next speaker, Agnieszka Łodzyńska. She's an art historian, writer, tutor, who is interested in exploring counter-hegemonic cultural practice and issues of embodiment and collectivity in the post-digital age. The title of her presentation is Dead and Kicking, TikTok and Subculture. Please welcome Agnieszka.
I'm not used to this, so I think I'll just leave it. Hi, everybody. Super nice to be here. Thank you so much. Let me just test this. Yes, it's all working. All right. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Closer? Is this good? Even closer? Wow. All right. Now I'm installed. Yes, now I can see and feel the difference. Okay, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your attention. As you can see, this is my topic. I will be focusing on this idea of how subcultures function in online spaces, more specifically on TikTok. So as you heard from the introduction, I'm an art historian, so I'm very interested in aesthetics, but also actually in TikTok and how this all functions in this digital space. So more specifically, I will be looking into how aesthetics on social media platforms can become actually political and how that happens and also the limits of that. So that will be the sort of focus for today. And just to be clear about the terminology, here I'm using the term subculture, which, I think is loaded. We could get into what it all means, but just for the sake of transparency, I will say that the way I'm using it here is essentially a subculture for me will be a group of users that both possess and then express certain interests and ideas that in some way are not mainstream or somehow counter-hegemonic. That's the definition that I'll be working with. So how did this interest come about? Well, it started 2 or 3 years ago with cottagecore, which I think some of you already know about. Can you nod if you've heard of cottagecore? Okay, that's maybe most of you. So I will talk about it briefly as an example of how these limitations work and why I became interested in this, and then we'll move on to my main case study. Cottagecore, the reason why I found it interesting is because it actually possessed a lot of potential for quite obvious anti-capitalism, actually. If you remember, some of the content is often about sort of rejecting toxic productivity and rethinking our relationship to labor and to the sort of constant interest in profit and this sort of intense development. And instead it was asking us to maybe reconsider, maybe slow down, maybe take up some hobbies that are actually not digital. It also had some interesting discussions of like reframing of domestic labor and thinking of what that could be, how it could function actually outside of a capitalist structure and outside of a patriarchal structure. A lot of it was very actually dominated by young users, mostly women, also queer people and people of color. So it seemed like this very sort of inclusive and progressive space. But the reason why it became even more interesting to me was the fact that there was actually some overlap between these aesthetics and actually something much more different ideologically, which was the trad wife sort of movement and spaces online, which essentially, preach this idea that, women should actually perform all of this domestic labor unpaid and unrecognized, and this is how it should be, and very conservative sort of beliefs. So that was quite fascinating to me, how these aesthetics actually are quite ambiguous. So this is sort of where I began this journey 2 or 3 years ago. And I noticed that this happens a lot. We have these aesthetics that are connected to sort of subcultures, these shared ideas, and there's always a sort of, there's a constellation of different types of beliefs that actually exist under a very similar realm of aesthetics. So another example would be dark academia, which on one hand was very sort of intellectual and interested in discourse and embracing reading and theory, but at the same time there was some critique about it being a little bit classist and also leaning very much into a sort of colonial aesthetic, like old money that was essentially made on exploitation. Well, this all brings me to my main case study of something that sort of emerged a few months ago. And since then, I've been looking into it. And today I would like to share with you, actually, core, and what it is. What it is, what it can be, and how it differs to the previous cores that we have seen. So I have a 1-minute video that I will share with you now, and then we will talk about it. Enjoy.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Oh, that's that little mark with the A and then the ring around it?
Cat.
See, that's what I said.
And what about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Sure.
What the hell is that exactly?
They're calling it iPhone.
That looks good. That looks really good.
It's clean and simple.
Hello, you guys.
Hey, guys.
Hey, guys.
Hey, guys.
Smash that like button.
Can you smash the like button?
Go ahead, smash that like. The reason why our generation is so messed up and has higher anxiety and depression than our parents is because we have to deal with social media. Everyone feels like they have to be perfect.
Here's a super easy tip to take better selfies on.
Are you still taking selfies like...
The moment we've all been waiting for, yes, this is my new card.
Welcome to all brand new
Don't need a lot of followers to do this. I did this.
All right. That was a taste. Oh, yeah, I need to come closer. That was a taste of what core has sort of been recently. This is quite fascinating to me. So I think now I would like to talk about that a little bit more. By the way, could I have a drink of water? Just because, it's very. Thank you. So, what is going on with core? Well, you can see here. We could call it, sort of an anti-trend. So even the name evokes this sense of self-awareness and meta-criticism. Thank you. Oh, much better. So how does this differ to the previous cores that we have seen? Well, the first thing that you might have already noticed is this idea of, a compilation. That often also has some clips that are overlaying that sort of invokes this feeling of chaos and things like that. The content that is being used in these clips or in these compilations very often, as you saw, comes from already existing media. This is very common for a lot of the cores. So for this case, it would be TV adverts, interviews, also films, different types of mass media, as well as already existing TikToks. So we saw there, especially in the second half, the content is sort of being decontextualized and then recontextualized in these quick clips. There's some themes there that I'm sure you've sort of identified, a sense of dissatisfaction with, in this case, sort of the way that social media functions right now. yeah, it's sort of a critique of the platform on which the content exists, which is quite interesting. I will also say that the development of Core is something that I'm still tracking. I think it is still very much ongoing. So yeah, you could say that it has this potential to be very activating for users who sort of realize the elements of the way that social media works that actually are not working for them anymore. However, at the same time, you could argue that some of this content actually bleeds into this sense of like self-pity and actually maybe doesn't doesn't activate users in some sort of meaningful way, and instead sort of points out all the struggles and sort of leaves everybody in this sense of collective dissatisfaction. So really, it's the...
On January
No. We've already had that. There we go. It's the ambiguity of these aesthetics that is quite fascinating to me. And yeah, the clip that we watched is obviously one example. If you look at some other core videos, especially from recent months, it really feels more explicitly, let's say, anti-capitalist, also has a very intense environmental message. And over the last few months, some of that has potentially diluted a little bit into this more depolitical sense of individual struggle. Another thing that I really didn't expect when I was doing this research is how quickly, if you set up a new account on TikTok and you only consume core videos, how quickly you also get served clips that actually come from like alt-right talking heads, like Jordan Peterson, like Joe Rogan. And these clips are obviously very short and snippy, like you saw, and focus on this idea of sort of an obsessive self-improvement and essentially focusing so much on the self without recognizing the systemic issues at play. Yeah, so some of that you can see here in these comments I have on the screen. But actually something interesting is happening with this sort of evolution that we can track, which is alongside this sort of hopeless nihilism, actually something else emerges, and this all happens in these sort of realms, these hashtags of core, but also philosophy talk, and also now hope talk. I think of all of these sort of subcultures as different bubbles that sort of overlap in very interesting ways. So here I have an example of sort of this continuing discourse that actually gives some sort of an informed hope on the future of social media, of societal relations. And my prediction is that maybe this is a direction in which we will be going with this type of discourse, but we'll see. But I think this ambiguity is really what makes this content so interesting and what you could call like sticky media. It really sort of keeps you wanting to come back to it because you are not so sure if you caught everything and you want to return to it and just double check and see maybe you've noticed something else. Maybe there's something in these snippets, in these compilations that will reveal itself to you if you just keep scrolling or if you just keep replaying. It's sort of a double-edged sword there. So where does this bring me? Well, before I get into sort of my hypothesis or some sort of a conclusion, I would like to mention this idea of zombie formalism, which sort of emerged in the previous decade, and it related specifically to painting and this trend that this writer and critic identified as essentially painters sort of reviving some ideas of like Greenbergian modernism from the 1940s and 50s. So these very specific ideas of what painting is, what painting should be, and sort of going through those same motions, but doing so in a way that felt very, according to this author, very sort of almost soulless and performative, something like that. And he says, well, okay, I see that there's some sort of a simulacrum of originality. So we are so desperate for the sense of development and change and progress that we create these sort of false artificial milestones. For instance, well, this is the first painting that was ever made using paint that was first placed in a fire extinguisher, this sort of thing. So that made me think, well, okay, could core be a sort of simulacrum of resistance? So is core going through the motions of this sort of language of resistance, this aesthetic of resistance, without actually sort of embodying it and really making that its core. So my proposal is to think about these types of online subcultures, constantly evolving subcultures, as these zombie beings that have these skeletons that are quite recognizable to us. They share these aesthetic interests, and there are some also common ideas shared between these users. However, the meat of this body is something that, from what I've seen, is kind of rotting and also mutating constantly. So it's a little bit hard to trace. And the things about subculture that used to be much more static and easy to trace have, since the dawn of social media, become much more fluid and tricky. So I think it's this sort of aesthetic ambiguity of online subculture that really, if we spend time to think about it and consider its implications, I think that's what could push us in some sort of direction of actual resistance and tacticality. So this is sort of my question that I'm still working on. Is core something that can break out of this zombification, or will it just continue existing and just being animated by the sheer speed of social media? And I will leave you with these two quite contrasting discussions that were happening in the comment section. So I do wonder, will the platform sort of absorb this type of critique, or will there be a way for these users to break out of this very unusual cycle? That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieszka. And the last speaker of the panel is Jordi Vieder-Guerrero, who is a practice-based researcher on the philosophy of technology and media, currently doing a PhD at TU Delft on the algorithmic mediation of the public life. His research and practice are chiefly focused on using design and theory to articulate digital technologies within wider cultural, political, and epistemic logics. Jordi will present his research project called Infinite Scroll as a Symbolic Form. Please welcome Jordi.
So, hi everybody. It's very exciting to be here, part of this panel. Thanks, Dunja, for organizing. Very exciting two first panelists. So today I'm going to present a project I also did in the darkest times of COVID, early 2021, called originally Infinite Scroller as a Symbolic Form, and later it transformed into being Infinite Scroller. And I mean, apart from Infinite Scroller being a catchier title, there's also an abandonment of a specific way of doing theory and about the issue of meaning that I abandoned during this project. So, first, what is this project? So, this is a fragmented video essay about TikTok on TikTok. This is the simplest part of the project, because then it kind of became a mess. Because at some point I solved this as a general theory of scrolling, but again, let's take theory with caution, because this is also an invitation to make theory differently, to scroll to theory, and to think about theory as a very different practice as the one we actually think about. So, why scrolling? Today, this morning, Joanna presented a slide that was very interesting for me about all of the different practices that can be datified, all of these already existing practices and habits, but also social media, and more specifically, social media on mobile phones, has created these other habits. such as scrolling. So this project started from a place of amazement, right? We sit all day, I mean, not all day, but a lot of our time during the day, just scrolling, making this motion that these technical devices created, right? Before that, scrolling wasn't a thing. We did other things with technical devices, such as writing, such as perhaps also scrolling on our mouses, but not scrolling in the way we do. And I wanted to engage with scrolling basically in a theoretical way, right? So the first title, Infinite Scroll as a Symbolic Form, comes from a play of words from this old 20th century philosophy essay called Perspective as a Symbolic Form by Ernst Cassirer, in which basically he comes to argue, okay, perspective, this visual thing, has also this kind of like deeper philosophical meaning, right? In which basically comes to say that perspective structures the way we experience the world. So I was very interested on thinking about how scrolling comes to structure the way we experience the world. So yeah, that was my main point. Then again comes the question, why scrolling through theory? So, wait, gonna get my notes before I get lost. So, as I was telling before, by the end of this project, I abandoned the question of the symbolic and meaning. So I abandoned this title of the symbolic form. Where does that come from? Precisely because I started to think about perhaps not asking what scrolling means to us, or what scrolling is in a transcendent way. So we have scrolling, and then we're doing something else while we scroll, but thinking about scrolling about something that we actually do and that actually exists in the world. What do I mean with this? So basically, instead of thinking about okay, there's the actual real world out there, the actual world of practices, the actual world of theory perhaps out there, and then there's the scrolling, no? The thing we do that we're when we're bored in our houses, I'm saying no, scrolling actually happens. Scrolling is actually a thing that that's there, right? That's as material as all of the other practices. And that's more or less the pun that I intended through the entire video project. So basically, I wanted to shoot myself scrolling. So instead of, perhaps I'm just this weird guy that instead of shooting myself at home doing weird and funny things, the entire joke of it all was, okay, I'm gonna film myself at home while I'm bored scrolling. So basically, you can see here, it's just me scrolling in all the possible different ways. And I wanted to denaturalize this idea, right? Scrolling is not something necessarily very simple, which in a way, that's what big social media companies try to do, right? Basically, scrolling as a way to interface through these very complex, also infrastructures, such as this app, TikTok, is a very complex place, but also, of course, connected to a bunch of very complicated material infrastructure. And scrolling is a way to simplify this to the user. So I wanted to complexify the action of scrolling. So that's why I added layer on top of layer, on top of layer, on top of layer. I wanted to add, basically say, okay, scrolling is this way to access this very complicated infrastructure. Another main point of this project was to think about, again, what are we doing when we are scrolling? Why are we scrolling? So I kind of make this para-history of how do we access things on the internet. So I start from Google and Facebook by saying, okay, scrolling was this way to interface through information, as a way to access information. But what TikTok reveals to us is that scrolling is not just the access point, but it's also the end. We scroll because we want to scroll. Like the comment that was over there, it's basically, hey, this video is so illuminating, swipe to the next one. Because the point of scrolling is not about capturing and communicating or just absorbing things, but just the very fact and sake of scrolling. So in this way, again, the main point of everything was to denaturalize this reflexive physical loop of scrolling, and make scrolling again into something that's not obvious, that's not evident, and make it something opaque. That's why I also wanted to embrace this opaqueness in the aesthetics of it all, right? I wanted this project to be opaque, difficult to delve into, just like this overwhelming sense of theory and images coming to you, a bit like Core, actually. Now I was completely illuminated by Core. I didn't know about its existence, and I think this, in a way, is part of Core. And also, I think the criticisms pointed about Core can be said about this very same project. So again, I wanted to make an emphasis of scrolling happening in the real world, scrolling being a practice, but also scrolling not being an individual practice, but a collective one. So even if scrolling is something we do on our own houses, on our own mobile devices, scrolling is something that connects us to, first this app, TikTok, and first all of this other infrastructure. Again, it's a very disempowered practice. So it's a practice we don't have any power of negotiation in. And it's actually a practice that basically simplifies all of these complex systems in which we're being connected. But nevertheless, it's a practice that makes us come together and participate in all of this, systems. So we shouldn't underestimate the power that actually scrolling has, right? Because at the end of the day, we are there doing this collective practice all together. And for this, I also asked myself, so why scrolling has this power on top of us, right? Why are we succumbing constantly into it? And in this, I wanted to think about scrolling not only as this, like mechanical practice in which we're subjected to, but scrolling as, and generally the internet as a place we scroll in, as a place for pleasure production. So basically, thinking information not as something we just consume and take from the world, but information as a side of pleasure production. And this is why I kind of abandon theory as a framework, right? Because theory is not anymore about representing the world and having a clear idea about the world, but engaging in these practices, in the case of TikTok, of pleasure. There's a caveat, though. I don't think that pleasure is necessarily an emancipatory practice. However, the fact that TikTok is also, and accessing information is also about pleasure, it means that basically all of these systems that are created also have other uses and other practices that are not necessarily the ones they are conceived with. So this is more or less why scrolling through theory, right? To invite people to think and do theory in a different way, to think theory as this site of pleasure production, and also scrolling as this site of pleasure production. So what I end up doing is doing TikTok and theory wrong. I basically messed up both of them. I didn't have a proper theoretical framework, nor I didn't have proper TikTok videos. Both of them are very weird. In a way, this essay is not structured, right? It's a bunch of different fragments and different aspects. There's almost no coherent line to it. It's very even difficult to read through. It's actually easier to scroll through because, of course, if you go into my TikTok channel, like and subscribe. If you're going to my TikTok channel, it's way easier to scroll through the videos than to actually read the entire thing. Also, it's just, now that I know about Core, I feel it's not so weird, so it takes a special thing out of me. But they're very weird videos in the context and the logics of TikTok, right? Though they do follow certain TikTok logics and trends. One, they're very dense. I feel all TikTok videos, in a way, are very, very, very dense. So I wanted to play with this density of information. And also, I wanted to play within the TikTok trends. So I wanted to use songs and aesthetics related to TikTok. For example, this is clearly a reference to Dark Academia. There's an attempt of cottagecore, but of course I failed. An attempt to go into there was this anime music video trend. And I wanted kind of to hijack those trends and get somehow infiltrated within these trends. Most of them failed. I didn't become a popular TikToker during the pandemic. there was the one that had the most views was actually site located, specific located. So this one was shot at the MACBA, that's a contemporary art museum in Barcelona. That it's a very well-known meeting point for counterculture, but also it has become a hashtag and a trend on TikTok. MACBA Live, it's also a hashtag right now, and that worked. And basically I feel it's also a place where a bunch of skaters go to skate. So I feel like a bunch of skaters just ended up watching my theory video, which I'm kind of proud of. So, to wrap up, I wanted to end up with a question, which is a very similar question to the one Agnieszka was asking. One of the main goals of this project was to be basically honest with myself and ourselves. So yeah, we're scrolling machines. I don't think we can get rid of scrolling. We're stuck there. The thing is, now what, right? What do we do with ourselves now that we're trapped in this scrolling feedback loop? I don't have any easy answer. However, I do think one perhaps starting point is to think our relationship to this interaction, to these interfaces, and to these devices in different ways. So rather than thinking scrolling as, again, this zombified, I mean, there are many different ways to think about zombiness, but just like this dead place where you go, for your brain to die, think scrolling as this place of production. Perhaps this sounds very capitalist in a way, but as a place perhaps of production of, I always like to say, emancipation, joy, desire, as basically, in a way, emancipatory and positive passions. This is not very different from live, laugh, love. But I don't know, I tell myself I'm too young to be too pessimistic. So this is the conclusion of the project. If you want to check it out, there's a website, infinitescroller.com, or on TikTok too. Thanks.
Thank you for your wonderful presentations. A lot of interesting perspectives on TikTok and potential for tacticality have been introduced. What I find particularly interesting is perhaps this notion of dual tacticality. So as Tina already introduced her take on tactics as desertorian tactics in the beginning when you were researching boredom on TikTok. And you weren't really focusing so much on the media platform tactics of, this grapple between the users and the platform. But I guess also with time, as boredom was somehow also appropriated by TikTok and exploited in a certain way, there was probably also this need from the users that generated to perhaps employ media tactics. So not only desertorian tactics that concern the real life boredom that they manage somehow to overcome on TikTok, but now there is this, dual front, I guess, that they need to take into consideration, which is probably also the same with Agnieszka's case of Core, that had certain political and ideological representations that are not necessarily connected to TikTok, but then there is this platform intervention that might have also steered these ideologies in one or the other way. So maybe I actually want to pose an open question to all of the speakers about those types of dual tactics that generate in the platform environment, and how users are being invited to somehow employ platforms in order to convey certain political or social action, but also at the same time they do need to fight this platform giant that has its own interests in the matter.
Go first. I have like a million gazillion thoughts going through my head right now, so I'll just try to address some of the very rich questions that you've asked. So I guess, I guess on this point of the tension between the kind of tactical, like using the platform and the way that the platform wants to be used, the way the way that people are just seeing other people using it, so using it very kind of like in a very straight way. I think I said not all of the TikToks that I looked at did that, but most of them did actually, and obviously a lot of that would had to do with the use of the track, the board in the house track, which didn't necessarily invite that much of a kind of counter-political thrust. But I suppose the way that my project is trying to kind of like think about boredom is as a very sort of explicitly biopolitical issue, where like boredom is actually the thing that sort of is automating the scroll, like activating and automating the scroll as this sort of mindless gesture. But I really like the way that you're thinking about scrolling as both mindless and fulfilling lots of other affective roles. So there is a kind of pleasure to the scroll at the same time. Anyway. Sorry, I'm totally lost the train of my own answer.
Can I interject? Yeah. So basically, maybe I can address the last point that you made. That kind of TikTok really maintains this bored body problem.
Yeah.
So in that sense. How would you maybe speculate, even at this moment, about potential tactics to really fight off that type of influence that the platform has?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know. Okay, so during the pandemic, though, I was learning TikTok for the first time, like through studying it, but also trying to use it, and I had the really good luck of I was involved in at the time, like before the pandemic started, I had been involved with a sort of young creatives program that was supposed to be doing one thing, and during the pandemic we obviously had to pivot to another, and so that quickly became a co-creative project where I was getting a group of young creatives to try to document what boredom felt like during the pandemic, and I really wanted them to use TikTok. But as somebody who wasn't like I feel like a total interloper, because I definitely wasn't a TikToker. I'm not even that advanced. I mean, I'm not a filmmaker or a media practitioner in any way. I'm a theorist, so I was really trying to get them to use TikTok in ways that were very antithetical to the way it was built. So number one, we used TikTok and set it to private and used it as a diary space. And actually, the kinds of things that those students were making were so different from the TikToks that exist in a space where everybody knows that they're being seen. So like just that surveillance aspect, I think, is a really important way that I was trying to. And then platforms can actually be really allies of critical introspection. It's just that they're not they don't tend to be promoted that way, or the platform norms don't skew in that direction. So I guess that's one way, just trying to kind of like break the sort of typical link between boredom just being this automated gesture that isn't something that you should think about in any way. Like, so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm also very interested on the topic of boredom, right? Because I do feel what you said at the end. These platforms benefit by the fact that we are bored all at home, and I mean the first solution is also like the very meme solution, go outside, touch grass, which on the one side, it's kind of true, right? If you just go do something else, you basically start, kill boredom and start doing different things. But on the other side, I don't want to look at these platforms as possibly, or like the things more than these platforms, the things we do in these platforms as not just boredom killers, right? They can be something more. I just look at the history of media, right? There's this scene, I think, in like an Italian movie from the 50s that this, like the mother is telling the guy, like, oh, you're going to the cinema again. You're just like wasting your time. And it surprises me, right? Like cinema is regarded as this waste of time that you go to like kill boredom. And now we do see cinema as something, something way more interesting, right? Something that is like this kind of good, productive, or whatever thing to do without like those many negative connotations. So perhaps like I think it's a very interesting practice what you did with your students. Like perhaps if we try to just modify a bit of the parameters of what is expected us to do in these platforms, and then we can resignify or reinterpret or just rethink all of these different gestures that we're already performing there. Yeah. Again, this is very limited, right? I don't think this is like a revolutionary praxis, but it might be helpful.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There's, I guess, also when you're thinking about certain tactics in regards to platforms, you can have this approach of perceiving interface affordances as certain sites of subversion, and thinking about the ways that you can use them differently. But there's also, I guess, this reconceptualization of the platform or these affordances that might not change the practices so much, but as it is the case also with the infinite scroller and your theory of scrolling is also about just resignifying and reconceptualizing what you're already doing. I'm also wondering if, when we're also talking about platform appropriation, that was the case also with the board in the house trend, that TikTok kind of opted this trend, this aesthetic, it capitalized on it. So I'm also wondering if there's a possibility for the users to kind of change their attitude towards those types of appropriations instituted by the platform. So is there a possibility for the users to kind of perceive platforms' power as marginal in a sense, something that's tolerated, rather than bringing this sense of technological determinism and powerlessness, and this like defeatist attitude that, well, we're trapped now in this environment and look how they're exploiting us, etc., etc. I guess, that this is more of an open comment, so if anybody has any ideas, I'm welcome to hear it. But I would actually like to give Agnieszka the stage now to address the first question as well.
Yes, I will. Can you just rephrase the question for me?
So it was about the dual tactics that generate in these platform environments. So you have this tactics that concern certain phenomena or structures or ideas that are not necessarily platform bound, but platforms are used as a tool to address certain inequalities. And then there is also user tactics towards the platform, so kind of fighting against the platform power. This tension that kind of generates in between the two. And especially with your case, this kind of concerns this ideological struggle between core being a vessel for left-wing ideologies that kind of mutated into right-wing ideologies with Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate and all of the other important alt-right talking heads. However, it's also kind of facilitated by the platform. So while you're fighting this ideological battle, you're also fighting the algorithm, for example. So I guess how to, position yourself as a user between those two battle fronts, in a lack of a better word.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of the users themselves are trying to figure out and navigate. So I think one way to do it is just to stay vigilant when you're on the app, and as much as you can think about the wider implications of the decontextualized snippets. But that is not something that the platform encourages. And the way that these compilations and slideshows work is, well, you're supposed to not think about each thing individually, but how it all fits together. And the fact that it's ambiguous, as in the implications are ambiguous, I think that's what makes these subcultures, both interesting and dangerous, let's say.
Can I ask her a follow-up question about that? Just because I'm just really intrigued by core, and I'm gonna go and do some research. But I'm wondering how internally coherent, like because obviously you were trying to kind of show, that there is some sort of possibility for anti-capitalist stance within, the one that you showed us, but then you said at the same time the platform doesn't seem to recognize political stance, and that's what was maybe generating that algorithmic kind of swirl, which in itself is so interesting because it seems to fight against this dominant narrative of filter bubbles, which makes TikTok interesting. So would you say that the individual core videos tend to be quite internally coherent in their stance? It's just that the algorithm is.
Yeah, that's something that I'm trying to wrap my head around, because I am not sure to what extent the algorithm dictates the development of the subcultures or the hashtags. I think there has been a sort of transformation. This is what I was mentioned briefly in the presentation. This idea that, from what I've seen, core actually originally, by that I mean a few months ago, seemed to be more obviously, anti-capitalist and environmentalist, and then it sort of exploded into a bunch of different, sometimes overlapping other hashtag subcultures. So this question of coherence is such an interesting one because, of course, for so many of these cores and subcultures, there is no leader, there is no manifesto. I'm just thinking in art historical terms. There's no there is no obvious cohesiveness, and that is why it's also so exciting. The question of how much the algorithm affects the development is, I think, maybe is supposed to be unclear. I don't think the platform wants so much transparency on that. That's what I would say to that.
Yes, so we will have questions in 5 minutes from the audience. Before that, I would maybe like to address different types of affordances that you might identify in your research on TikTok as relevant for tactical uses, so you can also choose which type of tactics you would like to address. Because I guess I want to touch upon on that because I do think that one of the parts of the develop in social media tacticality is this interface literacy. So maybe I would like to maybe take away from this panel certain ideas on what types of affordances on TikTok are relevant for being used in different types of tactical ways as well. Whoever is...
This is just an idea that popped up in my head right now. Precisely after hearing what you were doing with your students, perhaps it's more interesting rather than to think about the possible affordances the platform is giving us. It's more interesting to create our own ecosystems, which with that I just mean like groups of people, and that to use the platforms in specific ways, to create our own affordances towards the platform rather than the platform dictating to us the affordances, right? So if we create, for example, in my case, I basically received a grant by Head New Institute to do this. So there was this ecosystem on top of TikTok with this research grant from Head New Institute that allowed me to use TikTok on a different way. So perhaps this is an interesting model to think about platforms, right? Creating, workshops, groups with students, friends, reading groups, whatever. That use whose sole purpose is to use, sole purpose also towards political purposes, but that that's all about using media in different ways. And I also wanted to add on top of a little bit up on the past discussion about how the algorithm determines like these subcultures which is also again an affordance of the algorithm. I'm relatively optimistic because while I was doing this project, you end up in these very niche sections of TikTok, which are clearly not what TikTok wants to as an image of their own platform. It's like as if you end up in this weird dark alleyway on the city, and you can end up there, and there are so many of them, and I feel like I feel it's getting more difficult to get there. I think 2 years ago it was way easier to get into these rabbit holes. In that sense, I'm in a way a defendant of filter bubbles. But yeah, in this sense, I don't think the algorithm has full control of determining all of the different subcultures over there. They're all constantly flourishing in different ways. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think what you've just said is something that. So these are so embarrassing. But anyway, the other thing that I was doing with my students was actually making TikToks, and I made TikToks in the way that any media historian would make TikToks. So I started. We also did a layer where we were researching what boredom looks like on Facebook and kind of trying to get a picture of what it looks like. Like how do you visualize what boredom is when it's an internal state, which is interesting. But so I started researching boredom keywords through places like imdb.com and finding clips and using those clips on TikTok and doing things to remix what boredom looks like on TikTok. And yeah, that definitely wasn't dictated by the platform, but it's still part of the platform affordances. And clearly, I don't think it matters to the platform, whether, that's why, yeah, it doesn't matter. I don't know.
Sounds a little bit like core.
Might have been.
Do we have time for another question? And then the questions from the audience, yeah. I guess I just want to close off also my round of questions with maybe just a short reflection on this tension between the visual field on TikTok and all of these invisible operations that structure our experience and possibilities on the platform. So I guess maybe I would like to ask how, from all of your perspectives, relate to the visual field being kind of the main arena of possibility, more or less, for the users, and especially because TikTok is such a visual platform and a medium. How do you see that relationship between the visual or visible, I guess, and the invisible when thinking about user tactics on TikTok.
I can go first, if that's okay. Yeah, I think the reason why I gravitated towards core and similar sort of bubbles, like also there's overlaps between that and like niche talk and philosophy talk, is because its visual language makes some of TikTok's invisible systems a bit more visible. So there's that visual language, kind of like your project also, of scrolling. There's the sense of being overwhelmed with content, which is sort of portrayed by that use of overlap and that sort of visual busyness. So yeah, I think that's... I wonder where that will go, but I think it's interesting to now see users reflect more consciously on the more kind of embodied practice and experience of scrolling, consuming, and interacting. I mean, there's also so much more to be said, I think, about the comment section, which, I guess I relied on that in my slides, and we didn't have so much time to get into it, but I think that is another place where actually there is potential for some sort of exchange, which of course, you could say often is like meaningless and surface level, but maybe not. Maybe also in the comment section we can have a new sort of structure for interaction that maybe is more referential to like other platforms and other ways of engaging. Maybe there are ways to also get off the platform together somehow, and revisit it later. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess I'll start by answering this in a slightly different way, which is that one thing that obviously interests me as somebody who was researching boredom is, as I said before, like how do these TikToks try to make boredom visible? And in fact, most of them don't make boredom visible at all, because the point of the TikToks is to help show what people can do in order not to be bored. So, and this is obviously a paradox that is a common trait of all the digital media formats that I look at for the most part. And so I'm kind of like looking for counter examples. So most of the TikToks I look at, render boredom invisible because through hashtags that promise to render it visible. So it actually really hides by purporting to establish this community of bored people. It actually hides boredom altogether. And so one of the categories of TikTok that I code actually it's a much more minor category of TikTok. It does render visible what boredom, kind of like it's sort of some of its effects on the body, and it uses more kind of durational time structures to sort of capture and work through that. So, it's interesting that it can be used that way, but it, for the most part, it doesn't really. So I guess what I'm trying to think through is how we can kind of, think about boredom as a kind of invisible labor that,
Yeah, so basically there is this kind of, relationship between what the platform also requires of the users to visualize, and then that also kind of determines the field of the possible visible, I guess, and then also how users are actually using these visual affordances of the platform to ponder on all of these invisible structures that flow through the platform.
Yeah. So if I got the question correctly, it was more or less about how do we make politics or tactics with a visual, right? In a way.
How do we make
politics or how do we act tactically with the visual?
I guess you can also answer it in that way. It was more of an open question to kind of reflect on this relationship between the visible and the invisible in the platform environment that is very crucial in how people will behave, how the environment is going to look like, what is possible, what is not. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, perhaps I'm repeating myself a bit to what I said before, but perhaps I would think that I'm more interested in all of the practices around the visual, right? So all of the practices of both production and consumption of the visual, and just consider like what are we doing with these practices, right? So how can we make, or how can we how can we just make these practices tactical or political, rather than something off the world that is like, it's in the end of the day, it's a discourse about arts and politics, right? So for me too, like, is art production something outside of the world, or is art production a way of political engagement, or a way of tactical doing in the world? So perhaps for me, it's more about, like, again, the practices around it, and how can we rethink this as changing how we act, or changing how we, or also how we see.
Yeah, that also kind of ties in with that whole notion of like reconceptualizing all of these practices and affordances and ongoings on the platform. Thank you all. I would then now like to ask the audience if there's any questions. Yeah, there's one there.
Yes. It's a question to Agnieszka. Did you read the article on Core on hyperallergic that appeared 2 weeks ago? Because they said it's not just the algorithm, it's not just the kind of material that gets mixed in with Core, but the whole Core has basically gone alt-right and manosphere in the last couple of months. So they say, I can read it here. TikTok's Core is where men scream their anguish. The trend's throwback to data offers a warning about the crisis of men's mental health and the rise of the far right. So they say it has gone fully far right by now. And then I wonder, is it not just, let's say, a new zombie formalism, but maybe this is also new 4chan, because this is also how 4chan started as this kind of Dadaist forum that then became the alt-right medium. That's my question.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. I think I've stumbled upon the article. It's interesting to consider Core as something that is already gone into super far right. That does what's the word? Anyway, that confirms or goes in parallel with some of the research that I've done and the things that I have seen. I don't know why, but I still have a sense of hopefulness within me somehow that we haven't lost it completely. But maybe it's not so much. Maybe instead of focusing so much on the terminology, we could think of this core as something that is mutating and transforming and actually now overlapping a lot more into this also niche side of TikTok that has this very clear hope angle that engages very directly in a lot of recent philosophy and ways of thinking that I would say definitely have little to no association with sort of conservative politics. So let's see, but I think it's even if we've lost it to the side of the far right, I think it can also evolve into another direction. Still, let's see.
I mean, that must be like a real difficulty in studying. You know, I mean, it's a difficulty in studying TikTok, but studying the kind of like really emergent, like subcultural trends on TikTok. It's, you know, the ephemerality of it, not knowing like if it's gonna be here tomorrow. It definitely poses certain challenges, doesn't it? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, a question for Jordi. It's about the theory of infinite scrolling. to me, it kind of seems like a regressive phenomena. Many people have written about that. It's the end of the social media, end of community. You've emphasized the pleasure of boredom, right? But many others will say, okay, but that's kind of more like a subliminal activity, right? And you refer to that, the pleasure of brain dead activity. I like that. It's quite precise. However, it's only one step, let's say, from there to full automation, and also maybe a complete. We've gone full circle, because this is another form 30 years, 40 years later of zapping of the television channels. And of course, the early internet was clearly presented as a critique of this kind of, interpassive activity where, you could create something yourself, and you could participate and, take over the media in a way, the tactical media or not, do it yourself or not, but, to create something that you want to do yourself. Do you think that the scrolling has this world, that this is almost automated, or because you were a bit ambivalent about that, because there's still some involvement of the subject?
Something that I'm perhaps getting out of this general conversation is scrolling in itself will not get us anywhere, right? Scrolling alone. Yes, I mean, I do think it can be described as this regressive gesture, in the same way as zapping through television channels is just basically, reification or machinization of our actions, of movements, and that's very dangerous politically, right? Precisely because I think that novelty in political action comes precisely out, like when you do something different, right? When you de-reificate, when you demachinize. But also my stand for scrolling comes out from not thinking about other kind of actions with this romanticizing view about the past. In the sense, like, my starting point is that all of our actions are mediated by technical systems. Therefore, there is no qualitative difference between scrolling and, I mean, this is a big stance, okay, so take it. Scrolling and perhaps joining a political manifestation or joining a political party. These all are actions that we do in the world and we do collectively and together. However, perhaps the caveat I add now after these conversations and this question is to make this action, to convert it into something that's more than just something machinic. We should embrace, like, we should create other contexts around them. What I was saying before. Perhaps not let these platforms to define what scrolling means for us. In the same way, like to not let basically television networks to define what zapping is for us, right? Because if you think about television surfing, I also see, it's almost like the revolutionary potential of collage, right? Or of like early 20th century forms of just like juxtaposing art, of this like almost eclectic forms of art. Nevertheless, of course, this was co-opted by corporations, and with that they created ads and advertising and just this very passive surfing channel consumption. So yeah, again, to sum back, I don't think that it's scrolling in itself. It's a magical thing, but it's about creating contexts and creating, which on the end of the day is political organizing, to use these gestures or to use these affordances differently.
Okay, but many would say, in a Freudian or Foucauldian sense, okay, you have the subliminal interaction, and that's precisely the moment when power can most optimally, let's say, enter the subject, right? Because you're not really aware of it. It goes so fast. You're not really noticing. And I'm interested in if we should further explore that element, you know, this subconscious, I wouldn't use the word consumption, but subconscious production of power.
Mm-hmm. I don't have a... It is true that, again, like, yes, this is it's very difficult to fight against, right? It's a very embedded automatism. I mean, perhaps we should make our own psyops. This is like the funny question. Yeah. Yeah. But
yeah.
No, I just maybe wanted to actually answer for you, if that's okay, or just provide my take on it. Because I do see that this type of reconceptualization of scrolling that Jordi suggests is actually very conscious. It's not subliminal. It's a conscious decision to take pleasure in scrolling.
Yeah, I think it's both. I totally get the potential argument, the failed argument that you didn't make about like scrolling being both a symbolic form and a material practice, and it's both at once. It's sort of it can be conscious and it can't be. And what was really interesting to me about studying TikTok during the pandemic was that people were incredibly conscious of like their digital their semi-unconscious digital consumption at a certain point, it did become conscious and leapt back in again. And so I think for me, one of the things that I was trying to think through in the way that the pandemic was trying to encourage, this nonstop digital consumption, as a way of dealing with the pandemic, is the way that, symbolically, the infinite scroll was actually really comforting in the context of the pandemic, because it mitigated against, like, completing all your Netflix, series that you wanted to watch. So, and as a kind of, like, almost, meditative, it's almost like the bead counting kind of, there is, I think, value in thinking about those sorts of gestures as providing some kind of, comforting, if very deeply problematic on other levels. So, like, needing to think about them in both ways, I think. I don't know.
And on that note, I think we all need a break. So thank you so much, Dunya, Jordi, Agnieszka, and Tina, for this lovely panel and your presentations. We will take a 40 minutes break, and we hope to welcome you back at 1:30, where we will discuss practices of streaming resistance. And please help yourself to some coffee or tea or chocolate.